It was Morning Live. Thanks for being with us. Now, the new development bank, which was formerly known as the BRICS Development Bank, is a development bank, and it's set to, of course, assist all member states and to help us unpack some of the bank's work and progress since its formation in 2015. We're joined by the bank's Vice-President and Chief Financial Officer, Leslie Maasdorp. Leslie Maasdorp, thanks so much for speaking to us. It's good to speak to you again. It's been a while with COVID and everything going on. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you for having me.
So, we've spoken before about the role of the bank, the work that it's been doing. But maybe just to recap for those who may not know or those who have forgotten since then, just what the bank has been up to since its formation.
Thank you very much. I mean, as you know, we opened our doors in 2015. It seems like just yesterday that I arrived in Shanghai, but it's really now 6.5 years. We've made substantial progress over this time. Let's just talk South Africa specific. Over the last 5.5 years, we have approved a total of $5.5 billion of infrastructure projects. Now, some of these projects are still in the process now, have been rolled out. So not all of those funds have been committed or have left the bank for South Africa. But just to give you some of the example of some of them, we have a $300 million project with the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which is north of 4 billion rand, focused on renewable energy, a lot of investment in solar and renewable energy in South Africa. We've got a project also, a 4 billion rand project with Transnet to modernize, upgrade the container terminal in Durban, which, as you know, is the main port, import and export sort of point in South Africa, so that will stimulate economic growth in the country. And we've got several other significant projects, specifically over the last 2 years. As you know, the bank played a major role in augmenting or helping the government fight COVID-19. Just for the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, we committed $2 billion. We've already fully disbursed back to South Africa to help the government find additional resources to fight the pandemic. So it's been a very busy period for us. Most recently, though, I should highlight to you, the bank also changed its character, and I would say quite fundamentally so, because we were started as a BRICS bank, as you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And just a week ago, we admitted Egypt as a new member country. That followed on from Bangladesh, United Arab Emirates, and Uruguay, who also joined the bank in 2021. So we look very different now from when we were set up.
Which is, of course, very interesting. What does that mean for BRICS overall, though? And also just in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, how has that impacted your work?
So the expansion of the bank to bring on board new countries have always been part of the design, part of being the intent right from day one. Naturally, we needed to build up the bank, develop a strong pipeline, a track record, begin to establish ourselves in the capital markets by raising debt in international bonds. And now that the bank is fully established, we have north of $30 billion of approved infrastructure projects. We have become a very attractive proposition for many countries to join. The intention has always been to create a new bank, a new institution that will help emerging markets beef up their expenditure on infrastructure in particular. Because as you know, infrastructure plays a very critical and a vital role in economic growth, in stimulating employment. And in South Africa in particular, as you know, we have a strong infrastructure deficit. So the bank is playing a very significant role in supporting the efforts of the government to beef up expenditure on infrastructure. And in South Africa, as you know, the biggest priorities are energy, where, as you know, we have had some real challenges because of the massive debt burdens of Eskom and the big operational challenges that entity has had. We see going forward significant focus for us on energy in South Africa. The second big area is transport. As you know, rail infrastructure in particular requires new, fresh investment. Road infrastructure requires fresher investment. And then thirdly, water. We have a very big project that we've approved to build additional capacity in Lesotho for the Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2, which provides water to Gauteng. And as you know, South Africa is a water-scarce country, so these projects will play a major role in supporting the water-scarce parts of South Africa.
So, Mr. Maasdorp, when it comes to funding energy projects, you mentioned Eskom and South Africa's energy problems are well documented. When it comes to that, what is the approach of the new development bank, and how does that differ, as an example, from how Bretton Woods institutions, for example, would approach development funding?
So firstly, when it comes to energy, right, South Africa has some unique challenges now. South Africa is about the 38th biggest economy or so in the world. But as far as carbon emissions go, I think we're number 12 or number 13 or so. So we are a massive contributor to global carbon emissions. We therefore have a very particular and important role to play on the African continent to ensure that we transition to a more low-carbon future. Now, the government has made some really significant efforts in this regard. The President established, as you might know, a presidential commission on climate change. We're working also closely with them. We're working closely directly with Eskom, with the Industrial Development Corporation, the IDC, as well as the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Because, for big infrastructure, you require this kind of collaboration and partnerships with all of these institutions. So for Eskom, our big focus is to assist South Africa to have a more appropriate energy mix. At the moment, it's completely out of sync. We have, 88% or so dependence on coal. That is not sustainable going into the future. So we need to have a more appropriate energy mix and a much bigger rollout of solar energy, of renewable energy sources is required in South Africa. And another big focus for us is to explore the sort of new areas, new technology. Right now, there's a big focus on green hydrogen. It's an area that holds huge promise. Here in China, for example, green hydrogen is seen as a potential fuel of the future. So in short, we want to help the government to green its energy footprint. And in this regard, we're working with a lot of other banks like African Development Bank and so on.
And the terms and conditions, because one of the criticisms of your Bretton Woods institutions, for example, is that they tend to trap developing nations, especially those in Africa and in the global south, in these debt traps for generations. So how is it different when it comes to the new development bank?
So the new development bank and most multilateral banks today do not set or impose conditions, for example, of the series of, for example, policy reforms or hold these countries ransom to the requirements that used to be part of what was called structural adjustment programs in the 1980s. It's no longer the case. It's still the remnants of that sort of era. A lot of people assume that these banks sort of, as you say, put measures in place that lead to some form of debt traps. That's not the case at all today. I mean, I can understand why in 1994, after we had the transition to democracy, and I remember going in as a young policymaker then as part of government, we were very reluctant to take resources from the World Bank, IMF, and all these multilateral institutions because of that bad experience that you have just referred to, where countries were trapped into certain policy reforms and conditions that they had difficulty in meeting. That is not the case today. We, in many respects, we complement what the government is already doing. We offer advice where necessary, but it's the government's own long-term plan. So Africa has a 2030 plan, for example, captured in the National Development Plan. We don't come and impose our own ideas on what that plan should look like. It's the sovereign right and duty of the South African people to determine their priorities. And we do this with all our other member countries. And then finally, with respect to the funding and the cost thereof, our interest rates are very low compared to what it would be if the government raised money themselves. And the reason is very simple. It's as follows. We are a very highly rated institution. We have a AA+ international credit rating. South Africa, to give you a sense, is BB minus, which means that we raise money. We are 6 levels above the South African government when it comes to our credit worthiness. So our cost of debt is much lower. We can raise funds cheaper and offer more attractive loans to the government. In short, I'm making a case for why South Africa should borrow more from institutions like the New Development Bank.
Fair enough, but just as a practical example, if we take R1, if South Africa were to borrow R1, on the open market by itself, as opposed to getting it from the New Development Bank, what would be the T's and C's, and how much would they actually pay back, and how much more, competitive are you than raising that money elsewhere?
Absolutely. We, as I said, are an institution that is highly rated. So to give you an example, we raised money on the international capital markets over the last, just in this past year in 2021, we raised about $5.5 billion. And the coupon, the interest rate that we pay the bond holders is around 0.6%, which is significantly less than 1%. Now, naturally, we don't give that as the lending rate to the government. We add on a little bit of a spread, and for that, because we have our own operational expenses, we also make a little bit of income or profit, if you like, in order to build up reserves for future lending. Because the way we work, or multilateral banks work, we do not distribute dividends, for example, to our shareholders. Whatever income we derive from our loans, we build up in reserves, which will allow us to lend in future again to the countries. So the lending rates are significantly below what it would be if South Africa, for example, issued their own bonds and raised that money internationally. We are significantly cheaper than what the government would, the rates they would get by themselves.
Is there a set rate that you charge, for example?
Yeah. So basically, the bank has sort of two windows of lending, if you like. So the first one is what we call sovereign and sovereign-backed projects. What I mean by that is when we lend to governments or we lend to state-owned enterprises that are fundamentally or mainly owned by the state. By that, we mean like state-owned utilities like Eskom or Transnet or DBSA or IBC, as an example. We can also lend to those entities on their own balance sheet, meaning, for example, our loan to Transnet, which I referenced earlier on, to upgrade and modernize the port of Durban. That loan is to Transnet, and the risk we're taking is Transnet risk because the government has not provided a guarantee for that loan. So that's the one window, which is sovereign. Then we also have what we would call a non-sovereign lending window. By non-sovereign, we mean private sector. So we can finance, for example, let's say the building of a rail line to a mining house who needs to move the iron ore, let's say from Sishen to Saldanha, or move their or increase the throughput of a rail line from Johannesburg to the port of Richards Bay, for example. So that loan we could give to a private entity. It could lend to General Motors or VW, or a private company who needs to export cars, for example. For the private sector entities, we would look at these entities, study their balance sheets, look at their risk profile, look at the probability of default in that particular sector, and do detailed analysis before we determine what rate we would give to those entities. At the end of the day, we are a commercial institution, meaning that we are profitable, have to be profitable as an institution. And the advantage for the government of dealing with an institution like ourselves, as I mentioned earlier on, is that all of the profits we make gets reinvested in our reserves for future projects, which goes back to South Africa. And finally, as you know, South Africa has just literally a couple of days ago paid its last installment to the bank of the $2 billion. We have already approved $5.5 billion. So over the next number of years and decades to come, South Africa will derive benefits multiple sizes of the investment that they've actually made into the bank.
Well, we have to leave it there, but hopefully when you are in the country, we can talk a little bit more. We've just had the fire to the parliamentary precinct. We've had our rail infrastructure completely stripped bare. And, so many opportunities of the things that you mentioned there, Mr. Maasdorp, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to those and what sort of a benefit South Africa could derive from being a member of the New Development Bank. But thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Vice-President and Chief Financial Officer of the New Development Bank, Leslie Maasdorp. Let's take a quick break before headline news.